Photis Baroutsos. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of History in Corfu, the university, Ionian University, that's how it's called. And today I would like to talk to you about the Ionian Islands and the West, and what does that mean actually. I was saying I will establish first what I mean by the Ionian Islands and the West. So I always like at the beginning to use geography so we can understand what I'm talking about. And I will set my screen now, anyway, as best as I can. This is Greece, as you can see, and over here to the left, at the southeast of Albania is Corfu, and close to Corfu there's a small island called Paxi, and then we have Lefkada, which the Venetians called Santa Maura, Cephalonia, Zante or Zakynthos in Greek, and then we have an island which is at the southeastern tip of the Peloponnese, between the Peloponnese and Crete, which is called Kythera in Greek, or in Venetian Tserigo, which actually Greeks use as well. They have changed it a little bit. They call the island Tsirigo, or the inhabitant of the island Tsirigot. So the very idea is, what are we talking about? Today, if I'm talking with a fellow Greek about the Ionian Islands, what we have in mind, what we would have in mind is completely different from what the Ionian Islands would be 300 years ago. And why is that? Because nowadays, this island of Kythera, which used to be part of the Ionian Islands, is actually part of the prefecture of Athens. So it has nothing to do with the Ionian Islands. It's not even in the Ionian Sea, right? It is part of the Aegean Sea. So how did we come to that? So I would just show you the map to understand that in no way today, these 7 islands constitute an entity, geographical or political entity, administrative entity, okay? In the past, they did. So let me go to my timeline that would probably enlighten you about, and I will explain what that means. Okay, so I'm trying to remove this, but anyway, we have the first Venetian period only on the island of Corfu back in 1206, and it lasted only 8 years to 1214. After that, Corfu was taken by the Despotate of Epirus, which was a Byzantine state that emerged after the temporary dissolution of the Byzantine Empire in 1204, after the Fourth Crusade. And after that, during the 13th century, we have the presence of the Holy Roman Empire on the island of Corfu, and through the Kingdom of Sicily, the king there being Manfred, the son of Friedrich II of the Holy Roman Empire. Okay, the last governor of the islands of the Kingdom of Sicily was Garnerio Alamanno, who managed to extend his position, his authority on the island for another 6 years, to 1272. And after that, the Angevins that we were called in by the Pope to kick out the Holy Roman Empire from the south of Italy, they did. The Anjou, actually, that's the name in French, and a branch of a royal family, the royal family of the Anjou. And they also conquered Corfu for the period from 1272 to 1386. All right? And after that, we have the second and, let's say, longest Venetian period on the island, starting in 1386. Around 1500, most of the other islands came under the control and belonged to the state of Venetian state, that is Zante, Cefalonia, Ithaca, and so on. Cerigo was already a Venetian island since 1204. But what happened here during the Venetian occupation of that period is that by 1669, that Venice lost Crete to the Ottoman Empire. The Venetian state in the Ionian and Aegean Sea consisted actually of these 7 islands and the island of Tinos in the Aegean Sea. So when Tinos was lost as well, all that was left from the state of Venice in the southeastern Mediterranean was limited to those 7 islands. And in that sense, since the Venetians called them Ionian Islands, and that entity became a part of the Stato da Mar, the state of the sea, the Venetian state of the sea, the name, the title, Ionian Islands, was standardized, let's say. And that stayed for a long time, because the following years, we have a different reality. After 1797, the Republican French conquered the islands for only 2.5 years, more or less. And that was, let's say, from then on, a new page in the book of the Western dominations, let's say, started, because it seems that the great powers of the time were in a bit of a embarrassment, not knowing exactly what to do with the Ionian Islands, the leftovers, let's say, of the Venetian state, of the dissoluted Venetian Republic, okay, in 1797. So at first, the great powers decided to let the people of the Ionian Islands create a state of their own, a government of their own, supervised, though, by 2 powers, the Russian Empire and the Ottoman Empire. That ended in 1807, and once again the French, this time in their imperial version, since Napoleon had taken over, once again they took the islands, and they stayed there until 1814. The English came, they captured all of the islands, and the great powers of the time at the Congress of Vienna, they decided to give the islands, to create a new state, but this time under the protection of the United Kingdom of England, Scotland, Ireland, etc. And this is we call it the British Protectorate, or the actual title of that state was the United States of the Ionian Islands. And that state lasted up to 1864, and that is when the English or the British decided to pass the islands to the Greek state, to the Kingdom of Greece. So you can see that, let's say, from the 17th century and onward, the idea of the Ionian Islands was standardized, and it actually, just because it were the territories, ex-territories of the Venetian Republic that remained, it was an issue, what to do with them. The great powers did not actually know what to do with them. And I think this is a common situation. There are for sure common characteristics when we are talking about the territories of the Venetian Republic in the Dalmatian coast, right? What they call the Schiavoni, the Venetians called the Schiavoni. So since we have established this timeline, I may put this away. Once the kingdom of once the kingdom, the islands passed to the kingdom of Greece, they came under a very different, let's say, administrative and political reality. So things started to change, and soon Kythera or Tserigo was not part anymore of the Ionian Islands. So the Venetians, in a way, were responsible for this entity that was created out of necessity, actually, and that ended with the Kingdom of Greece. A few years ago, when a few historians dealt with the constitutions produced by the two hybrid states, as I would call them, the Seven Island Republic and the British Protectorate, and they were trying to figure out what kind of texts are these. I mean, how should we deal with this text, given the fact that at this time, this period, the idea of a constitution was not common. There were no constitutions. If we are looking to the first constitutions in the European stage, we have to go, leaving apart the French Revolution, okay, we have to seek the first revolutions in Greece in 1822 and in 1832 in Belgium, the newly founded Kingdom of Belgium. So that was something new. And in fact, in my interpretation is that this texts, these constitutional, let's say, texts, were not texts that were directed to the interior political scene. That is, they were not meant to be what we have in mind today as a constitution, but actually they were a kind of a international obligation held by these hybrid states to the principles set by the great powers at the time, okay, when giving the authority, passing the authority to new governments, okay, to in these new states. But in this study, there's something really, really interesting that I would like to mention. A great Greek historian, Spiros Azdrachas, was his name, he's no longer with us. He used a term that it is probably difficult to translate in English, but I will just translate it saying Western-like, that the islands, the Ionian Islands, were actually Western-like, excuse me, my email is beeping, Western-like societies. What does that mean? He meant that living in a context, mostly political context and cultural context, in an exchange, cultural exchange with people from the West, being administrators or not, it's not only the fact that the authorities were Venetian or Angevin or British or whatever. The fact is that the societies of the Ionian Islands, the people of the Ionian Islands, acquired, let's say, an attitude that was discrete, that was quite different from their ideas, let's say, or the mentalities of the people in the Kingdom of Greece, which at the same time was in place by, let's say, officially by 1832. And in fact, even today, if you ask the Greeks, they will tell you that, oh, the people from the Ionian Islands, oh, they're a bit crazy. They talk funny. They have an accent which resembles to the Italian accent, more or less. Or the food they eat, it's different from ours, they would say. And that's true. And the culture is different. The carnival has a different taste in Corfu, for example. It's quite different. It does resemble to the Italian way of celebrating the carnival. And it's not only that, the architecture and so on. There are so many different things. And in fact, back when during the 19th century, when, let's say, the Greeks tried to create what we would call an identity, although I hate this word, I don't like it. There were actually two different ways to the creation of a national identity. One center was Athens, and the other center was the Ionian Islands. In Athens, they thought of the Greek nation in a romantic way, let's say, but in the Ionian Islands, the idea of Greece came through the liberation of Greece, just because the Ionian Islands at the time were under the British protectorate, the British protection. And after 1850, they started opposing the presence of the British on the islands. There were riots, a revolt, and they were trying to break free from the British. And probably from that way, since they understood their Greek identity as a process of liberation, they brought this new idea to the Greek central scene in Athens. But in Athens, they were actually, let's say, neglected. Although they were welcomed in 1865 in the Greek parliament, and although a lot of the representatives of the Ionian Islands who were elected in the Greek parliament at that time were, as I would put it, either members of the parliament or even statesmen that brought a new culture in the Greek political scene, they never were able to establish a new way. And in fact, on the Ionian Islands at that time, they thought of Athens as an imperial power that had colonized the islands. It's very funny because that idea appears on a few newspapers that were published at the time on different islands in Corfu, in Zante, and so on. And it's so funny because this colonial aspect, let's say, is something we discuss even today, is a matter of debate. We don't agree. I don't feel that this represents any kind of historical, let's say, explanation that would be fitting to what happened to Corfu, to the islands in general during the 19th century. So, having said all of that, to establish, let's say, the context of the Ionian Islands in a long process, I would like to go back to Corfu, which is the biggest island. And this is where I am right now, in Corfu, in my office at the Department of History. And I would like to share a few things about Corfu with you to present, let's say, the basic facts that characterize the presence of the Venetian on the Ionian Islands. Okay. First of all, I will share the screen again. Share screen again. And this thing bothers me over here. I don't know what to do with it. Maybe here is much better. Anyway, all right. So let me push this away. There we go. Here we have Corfu in the 15th century, the beginning of probably, or the middle of the 15th century. As you can see, we have the two peaks that probably were the cause of that's where the name of Corfu came from, because in Greek, the peak is called korify. So which is something Greeks do, they just omit the E at the middle. It becomes would be in plural korifes or korfes. So there you go. They say that probably that's where the name of Corfu comes from these two peaks, which actually, as you can see, were crowned with buildings, and the one to the left would be there would be the fortress from the Byzantine times, and that is what the Venetian would call at the time the old fortress, while the fortress on to the right, the pico to the right, would hold the new fortress. Anyway, for now, today, for us in Corfu, the whole thing, as we see it, this little island to the left that is fortified, is called the Old Fortress. And I'll explain why. As you can see, as we look to that small island, there is a bridge connecting that island to the main island, okay, to what would be the city. Okay, you see the buildings. And of course, there is a port. You see the depictions of triremes. One is entering the port. There are a few anchored at the port, which is called Madraki. As you can see, the city, or what would be called at the time, not città in Italiano, would be called borgo, is not fortified. That's how we can tell when that is, what's the timeline over here. And of course, as you can see, there are buildings all over the land connected to the fortresses. Okay, so this is the first stage. The Venetians, although at first when they came in beginning of the 15th century, they started fortifying the island, let's say, the small island there. We can see to the left. And already you can see they have built a contrafossa, which is a dry moat, no water in it. And they have extended the fortifications, not from the two peaks to the whole island, the whole small island. So this is something that had been done by and also they opened the moat, which we see, which is, that's why they built a bridge. Actually, that was not a water passage, that was land. They cut into it, so they created a moat, they created an island. So all of that had already been done by 1425, right? So let's go to the next map of the city. That comes from, that actually is a depiction of the city in 1537. That is when, that was the first major attack of the Ottoman Empire to Corfu. It was a part of a war, the third war between Venice and the Ottoman Empire that lasted from 1537 to 1540. As you can see here, a lot of things have changed. The bridge is a suspendable bridge and has been moved to the center of this moat, let's say, and all of the area in front of the two fortresses to the left has been leveled. So this is something that still exists. That's more or less how Corfu is today. Okay, and there are only a few buildings there left. One, which is the loggia, which is the place where the local council of the island, the council that is of the cittadini of the island, convened, and it stood there for a long time, not anymore. And the whole area was called La Spianata, the place that was leveled. Even nowadays it's called Spianata, although now they use Spianada actually in Greek. Now it's divided in two squares, let's say, the lower square and the upper square. And then comes what used to be the Borgo, which became actually the city, because what the Venetians did was that they kicked out everybody that was living on the small island to the left, around the two fortresses, and they used the area only for Venetian governors and Venetian, let's say, administration. Everybody else was kicked out. Now, you can also see the first phase of the walls around the city that were not actually great walls that the Ottoman army could easily broke through. And the idea was, and the Venetians knew that, that's why they created the spianata, so they could block their aggressiveness. So the next stage, excuse me, is that one is also, this is something, a depiction that is quite interesting. It stands, oh my, now I can't remember. It stands in the facade of a church in Venice, the Santa Maria del Giglio. It came to me, I thought I had forgotten it. It's part, depicts in general the facade, the glory of Venice, because it's not only Corfu, there are the major cities that were conquered by the Venetian Republic, Spalato, Zara, Corfu, Candia, etc. So Corfu is depicted also there as a major prize for the Venetians. And there we go, at the end of the 19th century, this is the Porta Reale, that was the main entrance to the fortress, to the walls of Corfu, not the fortress, to the walls of Corfu, that was demolished at the end of the 19th century. Unfortunately, nowadays, we can only see where it stood, nothing else. And this is a Corfu that actually we will not see ever again. But at the time, it's from the same time. Here we can see Corfu, the city, from the west, actually from the northwest, and we can see here the new fortress that was built by the Venetians at the end of the 16th century, the beginning of the 17th century. And actually not only the fortress, but also the different bastions and the moats again, and part of the walls, as you can see. This thing does not, you see that part of the wall does not stand anymore here. And nowadays, everything around the castle is inhabited, so that you can see houses or an open market. So that's another, let's say, aspect of Corfu we'll never see again. So this is, let's stop this. So you can have an idea of how Corfu used to be. And in that sense, it was, we can say that it was a city that was, its destiny was created by its fortifications. In fact, if you ask me today, is that the case today? Is the city characterized by the fortifications of the Venetians? I would say yes. But if you walk in the city, nowadays we're looking to an English city, because the British, when they were here, they had a very, very organized system of a way of organizing the public space in the city. They allowed people to build new houses or even extend their houses, that's adding floors to their houses, but that was done with a very specific way. The new houses or the extensions would have certain characteristics, okay, and that was checked thoroughly by the authorities, so nobody could evade the conditions set by the authorities. So if we look at the city nowadays, okay, we have the Venetian past, the fortresses. We do have the liston, which is something, a set of buildings with arcades that was built by the spianata, by the French. And this is like the stamp of Corfu, I would say. And but the rest of the city is actually English in that sense, because we can hardly find a few houses or monuments that from the Venetian time. Very few, very few. Although the feeling is, oh, the Venetian, this is a Venetian city. No, actually, no. It's the presence of the French, the English And the Venetians are clearly established in space. We can see that. Okay, and especially in the Spianata, there's the palace of the High Commissioner, the British High Commissioner, and today that is used as a museum and a gallery, painting gallery. But that set limits the Spianata to the north, and it's actually creating a new, entirely new perception of the city. So let me go back to the Venetians. What do the Venetians do? Do they come in 1386? Do they change everything? No, they don't. They don't. They kind of accept the situation they found from the Angevins. The land was divided in 13 baronies that was awarded to 13 barons that used to be Angevin, of course. And now they just changed the barons. They gave the land to the Venetians, Venetian nobles that came from Venice, that actually never stayed on the island of Corfu, but the land, these baronies, the huge feuds, went into the hands of the Venetians. And at some point, they even accepted a feudal law called the Les Assises de Romanie, as they have been translated. And we just have very few books about this. A feudal law that actually was a version created in Constantinople during the presence of the Franks in Constantinople, that is from 1204 to 1261. And they also found a council that actually represented the community of the city that was established probably during the Byzantine period, the last years of the Byzantine period, and was actually adopted by the Angevin, and it was enhanced. That is, the people participating in that council were given a few privileges, but in general, as the Angevins did, the Venetians did it well. That is what? To respect, let's say, the religion of the people living on Corfu. That was a mixed population, Catholic and Orthodox, because a lot of, mostly the Angevins brought to the island lower nobility from the south of Italy, the Kingdom of Naples, and actually gave them land and then entrusted them part of the administration. So these people stayed, did not go away. They stayed on Corfu. The Venetians respected them, but they took most of their land away, of course. What they strived for from the beginning, the Venetians, was to establish the priority of their penal law. That was their main interest. That's what they did everywhere they went, every place they conquered. Okay, they didn't care about civil law. They just let it be what was in place before they came. But gradually, they even, as time passed, they wanted to also use the Venetian civil law, and they did, actually. And it's kind of an irony, because during the 19th century, the French and the British kept the Venetian civil law as the civil law of the states, of these two hybrid states. So the next thing they did actually was to allow the council. Let me explain what I mean by the council. We have the community of Corfu. The council was the community had a kind of a privilege to form demands towards the authorities. We have cases of ambassadors sent to Naples, to the King of Naples, putting demands and asking for things to be done in Corfu. At some point, the council became, let's say, the organizing committee of the community, and gradually the council started to take the role of the community. It became, that is, a political council not organizing, but at first representing the community. And after a while, with the blessings of Venice, it actually took all the privilege that were given to the community. So the community, as if we understand it as an assembly of the people of the city, ceased to exist, did not exist anymore. The council was everything. That's why, if you read the text of the period, let's say starting from the 15th century, the end of the 15th century, these two words, council and community, mean the same thing, the council. So, and a process started at the beginning of the 15th century that ended at the end of the 16th century, where what? That this council was manned, and that is actual, the word is actual, right? Was manned only by people belonging to a certain social group called cittadini. These people had to be from Corfu. They had to be involved in a profession that had not to do with labor for 3 generations, and they also had to own land. So actually, with these three criteria, there is a new social group being formed during the Venetian presence on the island. And that new, let's say, institution would to be implemented all other, not just Ionian Islands, every other territory of Corfu in the southeastern Mediterranean. That is what we call, let's see, the Ionian Sea, the Aegean Sea, and the Greek mainland, and Cyprus. Okay, so everybody had to follow this example. The institution was actually established on all the Venetian territories, with the exception of Crete, of course. That's a very different story, and I mean, this is not the subject of our meeting today. Okay, so I'll just leave it aside. Doesn't really matter. And it comes. The whole process comes started in 1386. That the people of Corfu decided willingly to accept the Venetian authority after the end of the Angevin period, because there was a gap of authority at that time. The Venetian fleet was around, and the people of Corfu accepted the Venetians, and that was called dedizione in Italian, and that was officialized by the Senate of Venice, by the community of Corfu, and the Venetian period started. And that brought this new kind of institution that led to what? This institution became actually a partner in administration, in the Venetian administration. Just because the Venetians never were actually, how to put it, they were not intervening a lot in the way things were done on their territories, more or less. Soon enough, after the creation of this institution, the Council of the City of Corfu, and the creation of the social group, the cittadini, the council became an actual pole of authority on the island, because they did not only have a kind of political authority, they also had social authority and economic authority. That the people, things that mattered in everyday life for the people living in Corfu, not just in the city, but all around the island. And that is something that came to the Venetians and created a kind of situation where the people might distrust the council and not Venice. Sometimes we do have people that expect Venice to intervene and save them from the overwhelming authority of the council. One of these cases is, of course, the Jews of Corfu, which was a strong community at the time, not anymore, not nowadays. After that is the World War II, there were very few left here, but they still exist, the community exists. But back then, since the Jews were very, very efficient, let's say, or not all of them, of course. We have to understand when we're talking about the Jewish community, that's like every other community. It's like a pyramid. Okay, at the top we have people working, just laborers, people who do poor people, and then as you go up, okay, you get to the top. There are very, very few people there that are extremely rich. They're bankers. There are a few even. They had a nickname. Aaron Matza, the banker, for example, il banchiere. Although they did not exist, banks did not exist at the time in Corfu. So they were actually what we will call today rivals in the economic supremacy on the island. So the council tried a lot, hard, to put them apart, neutralize them. Did not manage to do that. It wasn't easy. So the council, that's, let's put the focus there. Once it becomes an actual pole of authority, we see, because nowadays we do have the records of the meetings of the council, and we can see the rules that they had to follow, or the demands they put to Venice, or the things they asked for. We can see they're actually trying to enlarge their authority. They're trying to enlarge more and more their presence in the Venetian authority, in the Venetian administration. There is a story that is quite indicative of how they understood their presence on Corfu. At around the mid-18th century, one of the sons of a very important family of Corfu, the Bulgari family. You might have heard the Bulgari fragrances and jewels and so on. They came from Corfu. They moved to Rome and they established a business there, and they're very famous. They're still operative in Rome and elsewhere. So one of them, the eldest son, decided to kidnap a Jewish girl that was, of course, very young, 16 years old or 17. He did. And the young Jewish girl, obviously at the beginning, was willing to follow him, but things started to change. But pressed by the Bulgari family, they announced they would be married. Now, the Jewish family, the Vivante, also, they left Corfu after that incident. They moved to Venice and they became one of the biggest merchant houses in Venice. And they went to the Provveditore Generale and they said, please do something. They're taking our daughter away. So the Provveditore Generale, the highest Venetian official, tried to intervene. And he sent a battalion at the church that the marriage would take place. So when the captain entered the church, the nobles, or the cittadini, because at the time they had acquired the name nobles, the local nobles that is, they stopped the captain that would go and take the girl and the rest of the battalion, putting their swords out of their pockets and stopping the Venetian soldiers like that. That would give you an idea when I'm talking about authority, their authority, okay? And that was probably the moment when the Venetians realized that things were out of control and they started to react, but they did it in a very clumsy way. They executed a couple of them, not then, for a few years later, there was another incident. They tried somehow to suppress their authority. The thing is that as Venice began to decline after the War of Candia, the loss of Candia of Crete to the Ottomans in 1669, the more the local governors, let's say the local Venetian governors became dependent on the council. And by the end of the Venetian presence, let's say the 1790s, there were incidents that the local Venetian government did not have the money, the funds to pay the soldiers or rectify amend the fortifications and so on. So they had to borrow money from the people, the big families that were members of the council. That also is something that is quite indicative to understand what happened. Now, on the other hand, what happened with the rest of the people of the island? Let's see what went on. Now, let me just say first that the other island, that this kind of settlement, let's say, between the council and the local Venetian governors was established as well, was the island of Zante, Zakynthos. Actually, the people from Zante at some point, around the end of the 16th century, demanded the Venetians to let them create an institution just like the Corfu one. They actually said, we want this model, the Corfu model. And they actually were very good in imitating that model. They went on the same path. It was not the case of Cephalonia, the biggest actually island of the Ionian Islands. Okay, there we had, this council never had that part. It was never limited to a closed, restricted social group. There were so many people that were allowed to join the council. The only thing that I could mention, and that would make sense to you, that was there were a lot of different factions fighting each other in the council and outside the council. It was a mess. Cephalonia was a mess. You didn't really know what was happening there. But in Corfu and Zante, things were very, very, very strict, very organized. The council played an important role in that. What about the other people? Was there another, let's say, social group that was accepted as a separate social group? No, there wasn't one until the year 1786, that is too late. The Venetians allowed what you would call another group of people that had the similar characteristics with the nobles, allowed them to form a council, and they called them civili. Okay, people of the city actually, and civili would also mean the people who had the criteria that the nobles also had. They were people that's what the criteria was called by the Venetians, tre gradi di civiltà. So civili would mean that they also had the 3 grades of civiltà, but they were not allowed to take part in the council. So they gave them a second council just for them. That only lasted very few years, of course, as you can understand, from 1786 to 1797. And the rest of the people in the city, of course, they had no such kind of aspiration. They knew they would not be allowed to have their own council, although there was some kind of a case in Cyprus where people were allowed, the lower part of the population of the city population were allowed to have their own councils. But no actual privilege, of course. They only had the privilege to present demands to the local Venetian governor. That was it, nothing else. Where in Corfu, the only ones having this right, let's say, or privilege, were the cittadini or nobles through the council. They could send the so-called embassies to Venice, put the demands directly there, And from a point on, probably from the end of the 16th century, they could also have their own people close to the Senate. They were called nunci, that could negotiate with the Senate all the demands put through by the council. So that's another thing which is something recent in the research, in the things we know about the people on Corfu in the Venetian period. It has been really studied, but we can say that now, and now we have found the documents to, let's say, to open a research about that. It shows us that there's something similar that happened in in northern Italy, the Venetian territories over there, which was the case that people from the different cities, Vicenza, Verona, and so on, could actually have their own nunci in Corfu, in Venice, also the people in Corfu. My last, don't want to say a lot more. The last thing I would like to mention is that Corfu not only stood as a model in a way for the rest of the Venetian territories in the Ionian Sea and the Aegean Sea and Cyprus, but it seems that it's the first time that a similar transition was held outside, except Istria maybe, a peaceful settlement, let's say, that would set a kind of a path for what happened in northern Italy. In what sense? In the sense that this first dedizione, this willing, the will of the people of Corfu to join peacefully on their own will, then the Venetian state, gave the Venetians, it was the start of the Venetian literature, where they presented Venice as a power, as a state that was providing buon governo, the good governance, and the people turned to Venetian state because it was a state that could protect them from the tyrants. Who were the tyrants? The people like who governed a city by themselves. There were no republics on the Italian soil, and not only there. So that's a first also for Corfu in a sense. The literature is building up later as time passes. So that's why I wanted to talk to you about Corfu, to give you an idea of what was happening on Corfu, what was the place of Corfu and its council in the Venetian state. And I'm here open to your questions and comments. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much for this. Thank you. Before I open the discussion, let me say a few words that should have been said at the beginning of this meeting.
Okay.
So, thanks goodness you presented yourself by yourself. So that is something that you did is not my task anymore. But let me just say that our guest, Photis Baroutsos, obviously is an expert in early modern time history of Greece, and especially Venetian presence in Ionian Islands as well as Crete. He's also an expert on issues concerning Jewish population in all that territory, and as well as many other aspects of cultural history of the region in the time in question. I am very proud to say and to inform everybody here present, and I will show you the rest of the public. You now see only me, because when I open the discussion, I'll turn the camera around, so okay, we will be in position to see people in the classroom. But obviously there is also an audience at Zoom. So I'm proud to say that your department and our Center for Comparative Historical Studies are establishing wider cooperation where we would like to, let's say, introduce a feasible way how to put in life Adriatic studies in future. So I'm looking forward to it very much. I'm sure that this cooperation is going to be very fruitful. And due to the fact that the name of our center is Center for Comparative Historical Studies, my questions that are going to come after questions from the others are going to concern some comparative issues to what you explained and what we know from the reality of Istria, Dalmatia, Venetian Albania in the same time, and especially in the late Middle Ages. Mm-hmm. So I will now turn the camera around so that you can actually see people together with the computer. Let's start the debate. First, I would like to ask our colleagues that are joining us on Zoom, are there any questions or comments from your side? Would anybody like to speak up? Not at this point, but maybe at some point later. My dear students who are listening to the course of Venetian present in Southeast Europe that are in front of me, are there any questions from your side? Yes, yes.
Before you mentioned certain characteristics that were.
Excuse me. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Okay, please continue.
Before you mentioned certain characteristics that were needed by the social groups to attend or to be included in the council, and I was just wondering which were those, also from the Venetian side as well.
Sorry, can you repeat that in a louder voice? Because I lost your last sentences.
Okay. So before you mentioned certain characteristics that were needed to attend the council, and I was just wondering which ones were those, and were they different on Corfu or in Venice?
Okay. That's a very interesting question, because since you mentioned Venice, and I'm saying interesting because, in fact, if you look, now recently a colleague of mine, actually my professor when I was doing my PhD, Nikos Karapidakis, asked me to write an introduction to a book he published. Actually, it's a transcription. He published a part of the records concerning the Council of Corfu. Okay, and he asked me to write an introduction. So I kind of tried to present how things, if there are any resemblances between the process held in Corfu as to establishing the institution of the Council of Corfu, and similar resemblances with the same process in Venice from 1297 and onward. The process they held there to establish the concept of the nobles there, and to link the nobles with the public offices they could hold. And amazingly enough, it seems that this process had a lot of resemblances, because it was a very slow process that in Venice ended in 1516, when they started registering all the births of the future nobles and the future members of the Maggior Concilio in Venice in the Libro d'Oro. Okay, that was the end of this process, because that way they could standardize all the process, they could exclude all frauds, people that try to infiltrate and establish themselves as somebody that was part of a patrician family in Venice. And it was easier at those times because they didn't have any identity cards or pictures and so on. So everybody could appear, they could not know everybody, would appear and say, I can do that. Okay, so that process ended like this. In Corfu, instead, it was the other way around. It was rather informal until the very last act of this establishment of the social group. That was in 1615, actually. But things had already gone official around 1580. And by that time, already the people who were already participating at the Council of Corfu thought of themselves as being nobles. Okay, and it's the same thing as in Venice during the 13th century. That is before the Maggior Concilio became what it was in 1297. So the criteria here is more or less the same. It has to do being, the only difference is that there is no such a thing as the Serata of 1297, which of course I'm sure you know of. Instead, in Corfu, it's a slow process of developing the criteria. And the criteria is said, being from Corfu or having lived in Corfu for a long time, 10 years at least, or having been married to a woman from Corfu. And then is avoid any labor profession, manual labor profession for 3 generations, and to own land, not necessarily a certain type of land, not necessarily feudal land, for example. No, land. And that would be the exclusion at some point took place like that. They were called, in every member of the council would be called to the committee that was in charge of this task, and they would be asked to present the proof that they had abandoned manual labor, that they own land, and so on. Okay? And of course, at some point, they added in one more in 1615. That's why I'm saying it's the last act. They would have to be legitimate sons of a previous member, of the council. And of course, as you know, and as in the case of Venice, the same in Corfu, it's not personal. It's personal, and it has to do with the family. You have to be member of a family to be member of the council. Okay? It's both. It's not just one. I'm a great person and they accept me. No. You have to come from a family that has all the criteria, fits all the criteria. And then you're accepted. Okay, plus you have to be legitimate. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Let me just say, Dusan, I'm very glad I'm here, and I also thank you so much for your initiative, and I'm looking forward to our collaboration regarding the Adriatic studies. That would be a great thing for everybody, I think.
Thank you very much. Sharing your feelings 100%. Thank you. Any other questions? I've got quite a few, if I may.
Oh,
okay. Let's say I'll make a selection of questions. I will not come up with all of them that are on my mind. First thing, I was interested to hear about those 7 baronies that were, let's say, taken over by Angevin times. Mm-hmm. I'm not completely sure if I understand the issue from that point later on. So, do I get it right? In Corfu, you have the city of Corfu that was run by the council, and mm-hmm. probably also the nearest surroundings of the city that was considering, let's say, the district of Corfu, where those council members had their land. So, but those 7 baronies still existed parallel to it on the other, let's say, in other places in the island. Were those baronies hereditary, and how those who became new barons got those baronies in Venice? Is that thing known? Was there any research on it? Because, you know, that is something that was not going on, let's say, in Dalmatia. We had something similar in Istria, but those people who were having feudal possessions in Istria were not Venetians, or maybe just few of them, others as well. So I'm interested first to hear more about those 7 baronies, and also if on other Ionian Islands we had a similar situation. Were there any feudal fiefs belonging to Venetians on other islands similar to Corfu?
Yes, okay. Of course, I said everything, you know, I summarized everything, so you're quite right to ask. Like, actually, it's a very interesting process, because what happened is, okay, the Angevins established at the beginning 9 baronies, and then they became 13. And the Venetians continued to accept the fact there were 13 baronies, but they changed the holders of the baronies. In the place of Angevins, they put Venetians. And actually not Venetians that came to live in Corfu, but noble Venetian families from Venice. Okay? And if you see the anagraphy or the investitures of the different baronies in the 17th and 18th century, they have the names of the Venetians. They held the baronies, despite the fact that most of the land was bought or given away in different ways to other people. So what happened in the 16th century that allowed everybody else to own land was that, of course, you through marriages and inheritances and so on, the land is breaking, the baronies are breaking to smaller pieces, but they still are considered to be baronies. So even people living in the city manage in some way to acquire land from the baronies, okay, which is actually feudal land, and it comes with the burdens of feudal land, okay? And the very interesting fact is that most of this land that passes to other people is not owned. It's actually, how to put it, exploited by other people. And gradually, as time passes, through feudal law, they come to acquire a fourth of the ownership of that piece of land. And that during the 19th century creates chaos when they have to resolve the situation. So you see, it is mostly because it's the third criteria, land, is achieved through what the fading away more or less of the role of the barons. The barons still stand. They are put on maps in the 17th and 18th century, but in fact the land is owned or not owned but exploited by people living in the city. The barons themselves were, of course, part of the council.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Actually to exercise the right to be there, because they never lived in Corfu from a point onward. Probably they sent some administrator to take care of things, and that was it.
Thank you. Now, listen, the next, let's say, small line of questions is about the council itself. So in Dalmatia, at least, and also in major cities in Istria, the situation with the council comes with a, let's say, a bit more history than obviously in Corfu, that started at the end of 14th century, more or less. So we have those councils in those cities already in 13th century. And in Dalmatia, historians tend to, let's say that all those councils were noble councils already. something that I disagree with based on my studies on Council of Raab. Who is, let's say, the exact story of Venetian Council and Serrata, kicking out a non-noble population from the council and create a circle that became the circle of old nobility and new formed nobility that were left in the council from the beginning of 15th century. So in the 14th century, the Council of Raab, which is Arbe in Italian, was formed both of nobles and non-noble population. The circle of people who were in position to enter this council was quite wide, but after taking a closer look of non-noble part of the council, it was obvious that the same criteria were used. So they had to own land and they had to be free of manual labor, which would enable them to be part of, let's say, political class. And they were more or less influential, rich as well as nobles. So there were some noble families not as rich as the richest of the populars or popolari. And that is how story went. But it was obvious already back then that the right to be elected in the council was hereditary. So next to criteria that you mentioned, it was the membership in the council hereditary also in Corfu later on in 15th, 16th century?
Well, yes, let me explain what by the process I meant that the council changed, right? It's the same situation as you mentioned. Let's say until 1570, more or less, there are no criteria active. It's the time that they just start to enforce this criteria. So sure, by the beginning of the 16th century, you can find all kinds of people in the council. Okay, the thing is that what changes the whole situation is that those already being in the council in 1480 is that they ask Venice to limit the number of members in the council. Okay, and that creates a kind of an elite that starts leading the process, moving the process onward so they can exclude all the other people that did not fit the criteria. And they end up in what they call the Great Council, or the General Council, where you have, it's like the Maggior Concilio, all the members that have the right to participate. And then you have the Council of the 150 that are actually running the affairs for the General Council, and they can be elected, not only them, but they can hold the higher offices, let's say, in the Venetian administration, while being a member only of the General Council would mean that you would not expect to be appointed in a high place, rather in lower places. That was the idea. So at first, yes, everybody could take part. At some point, maybe even Jews. That hypothesis, there's no other way to explain that, why a Jew was a member of the embassy sent to Corfu to appoint, to rectify the dedizione of 1386. Cannot be another explanation.
Oh, that's interesting.
There was another Jewish committee, let's say, sent to Venice to ask Venice to rectify the privileges and the Jews had during the Angevin period. Why?
That's interesting. Obviously, pragmatism, something like that. It was impossible to happen in Dalmatia back then. Absolutely impossible.
Well, everywhere else in the Venetian state, I think. This is because of the Angevin press. It is the Angevin that gave the Jews all these privileges, and the Venetians respected them. So to what extent, we cannot really tell. But the idea of somebody being sent as someone representing the community of Corfu, it means can only be one thing. He was a member of the council. I cannot think of another explanation, although we don't have.
Could be.
That can be held, a fact, an actual fact.
Another issue I was wondering about is the official language. As we are in a Greek-speaking world, let's say the minutes of the council and other things, were they held in Latin or in any other form? So what is the language of the sources?
Okay, let me, of course, during the 14th century, everything is in Latin, and from the beginning of the 15th century, Venetian, Latin, and Italian,
okay,
more or less. Now we have the official language, though, of the council was either Latin or Italian, starting from the 15th century.
But the notaries are in Greek.
No, nothing in Greek. No, there are notaries in Italian, Latin, Italian, and in Greek. But the notaries more or less come in the 16th century. Or they have been more in the, but the registries have been lost.
Okay.
And there is something that is quite interesting, and it goes on in the 19th century. A famous Greek author, literature. He was a lawyer. He could represent his customers in court in Corfu. He was from Corfu. So he was, while he was in court, he would speak in Greek. And that would piss off the rest of the lawyers present, and the lawyers would ask the judge to reprimand that lawyer and tell him that he should speak in Italian. That was the language of gentlemen.
Okay.
Not Greek. Okay. So you see, there was a rather large part of the population that was bilingual, for sure, but most of the people in the council, or those who considered themselves nobles, they would only speak Italian. They would know Greek, of course, but they would speak Italian. The rest of the people would speak the Greek, of course. Yeah.
What about the religious aspects of the Venetian authority over islands? The thing is, that is a question that cannot be risen up, let's say, in Istria or Dalmatia, or even in Venetian Albania. But obviously, Greek world is a bit different. So let's say in Borgo, next to this island of fortresses, how did the composition of church objects look like, and also, let's say, how this Borgo, how did it function in respect of, let's say, religious?
Yes. Okay, this is one of the things, the first things that Venice did everywhere in the, let's say, ex-Byzantine territories where you have Orthodox subjects, okay, Christian Orthodox subjects, that would be called Greeks, Greci, and that would be in their doctrine, actually, not really nationality. That Venice, following at first a very strict policy, especially in Crete, it prohibited bishops to exist. So bishops in Crete were abolished completely. There was no bishop. The property of the Orthodox Church was confiscated and given to the Latin Church, to the Catholic Church, that is. And that would be the case on most of the islands. But even starting from Corfu again, that would be a start. They started changing, realizing that it was in their interest to be more flexible, let's say, or tolerant. So they would, now in every case, they would appoint, that was something that started in Crete, beginning of the 13th century, they would appoint a protopapas. That would be the head of the local Orthodox church, but he would not have the right to ordain priests. That was the major issue, because they were trying to cut off the links, let's say, the bonds with the patriarchy, the Patriarch of Constantinople, the Orthodox Patriarch. That was, of course, at the time of, after the Fourth Crusade, there was no patriarch Orthodox Patriarch in Constantinople, but after 1261, okay? That was their main objective. On the Ionian Islands, they allowed 2 bishops. One that would serve at one term on Zakynthos, on Xanten, and another term, and the other term would be on Cephalonia. So they would try to please the population. There was a great rivalry between these 2 islands. And they left also a bishop on the island of Kythira, Tserigo. That, of course, as I told you before, that was not part of the Ionian Islands at that time, at the beginning, but it became, by the end of the 17th century, more or less, part of the Ionian Islands. So it seems that the policy of Venice towards the Orthodox is starting to change. Every other policy is starting to change in the 16th century. They become more republican, more or less. And they also make a move that would be, they try to encourage, they oblige people of both doctrines to take part in processions, common processions, 3 or 4 every year. And then they're trying to enhance a kind of a coexistence, a peaceful coexistence. And when they introduced the new calendar, the Gregorian calendar, in 1580, something, I don't remember exactly the date, something there is wrong. And what's wrong? If they introduced a new calendar, that would create a gap at the celebration of the Easter, like today. The Orthodox Easter follows the Catholic or the Protestant Easter by a week or 2 weeks, something of the kind. Then they coincide once every 4 years, something like that. So Venice is faced with this problem. What should we do? So they decided to introduce the new calendar and celebrate the Easter on the Orthodox date for both doctrines, for both people. Okay. And that is what happens, still is what happens in Greece today. Apart from that, if you're asking me about percentages, how many and so on, the Catholic communities were never strong, actually. And that was a major complaint of everybody, saying that we have no priests, people are not coming to serve us here in the Greek areas. And there seems to be a kind of a decay in monasteries that were founded and so on. But the communities are not dissolute, they still exist until the end of the Venetian presence. And it seems, as time passes, especially at the end of the 18th century, the numbers, especially in the Ionian Islands, drop. I mean, the Catholic communities are smaller and smaller. While when we go into the 19th century, under the British Protectorate, the numbers are better. The Catholic community grows.
Thank you. Excuse me, I have one more question, but before this question, there are 2 things that I would like to say. First one about the dedizione and the idea of it, especially in Venetian historiography, if we connect it to, let's say, the city of Zara, Obviously, all Italian historiography is following that story that it was an unwilling act, something that the people in Zadar wanted to. But the case was closely studied by our Zadar colleagues, and it was obvious that was not the fact. Yes. Because the city was handed over by a group of 5 people very much interested in Venetian presence in the city, while majority of the city was pursuing city's ambition to become city-state by itself as well. Something that Dubrovnik managed in ensuing time in 1358. So Zadar tried to create one similar city-state, but they failed. Obviously, they were seen as very strong, as, let's say, even in Trieste, they were considering who to see as their overlords, and somebody came up also with the idea that could be also the Signori di Zara. And also in Venetian Senate, there was idea by someone introducing the Zadar nobles as possible co-rulers of cities of terra firma, because they were used to political decisions like Venetians. So that is one very interesting case. And the other thing that I'd like to comment is, you know, the process of proving that you were actually belonging to Venetian nobility outside of Venice. I went through some cases based on my interest on Badoers that was strongly present in island of Rab, therefore Arbe. They were there for more than 500 years, and they had to go through similar process. So I went through the processes in Dalmatia and some also in Greece to see if they are compatible, and they were. The funny thing is that, for instance, if somebody who was appointed a rector in a city in Dalmatia and had a son born over there, so he had to prove by 2 credible witnesses that they have seen his wife pregnant in all the stages of pregnancy. And the 3rd witness should have always been the priest who was attending or actually doing the baptism of the child. And so at least 3 witnesses that were considered credible. And it was quite a harsh procedure. So they wanted to be 100% sure that they're accepting real nobles in the circle of nobles. But the question is completely of a different nature. That is going to be my last question. From Venetian point of view, they are putting, let's say, Istrians and Dalmatians in the same drawers, and they should be close as a part of Stato di Mare. But the reality is completely different. Istrians and Dalmatians, apart from economic relations, but economic relations that were similar with those from, let's say, from Marche, from Ancona, they had nothing in common. My question is, because I saw some issues in the city of Antivari, which is Bar in Montenegro today, where the captain and the rector were fighting between themselves, accusing each other of smuggling the salt from Corfu. So the question is, from Corfu point of view, not from Venetian point of view, how close to Ionian Islands is Venetian Albania?
Oh, what you would call the Greek world in general is heavily divided. They don't get along. I mean, to give you an idea, even today, there's no direct connection between Corfu, Zante, Cephalonia, or any other island of the Ionian Islands. So, and that is why in the British Protectorate, probably They just named the state the United States of the Ionian Islands. Every island was a state. That gives you an idea. I'm not exaggerating. They may speak the same language, they may have the same religion, but I don't think they have in mind something broader. You can imagine what it means when we're talking about some people that are not, that don't speak the language, and but probably they don't have the same religion. That it's a barrier that cannot be crossed in no circumstances. And in fact, when Albanians start to arrive, because by the 14th century, this flow of Albanians to the south into what we call Greece today, in the 14th century becomes, brings communities of Albanians that become an active agent in the area, especially Western Greece, okay, mainland Greece. So when the Angevins try to invade the part of the mainland which is south of Epirus, not exactly opposite Corfu, but to the south, they have major problems. They don't go that way because there are the Albanians. They have to take in consideration them, and they had to go around them or ally with them. It's not an easy task. So when the Albanians saw themselves, they start appearing on Corfu, the council starts appealing to the Venetian authorities and saying, do something about them. We don't want them in our council. They're not people from Corfu. They're brutal. They're barbarians. Do something about them. And in fact, they managed to keep them away from the council. But the fact is, of course, that a part of the population on Corfu and on other islands is Albanian. That's true, okay? But they were, let's say, they became part of the local society here. But at the beginning, the reaction of the council is like that. They don't want them. They consider them something different. But Venice wants a few Albanians to come to Venice, to Corfu, and they even give them the chance to become part of the council because they have this right. The Senate, for example, the Venetian Senate has the right to grant the privilege of the participation to the Council of Corfu, and they do, despite the fact that the Council of Corfu reacts and doesn't like it and so on. So more or less that's the idea. They don't really want them here on Corfu.
Thank you very much.
The other islands.
That's good to know.
Hmm?
Usually we speak about these topics as seen from Venetian perspective, but there are other perspectives as well. So that is why I asked that particular question. It is an interesting topic and also an interesting thing to discuss, let's say, Venetian world without Venetians.
Exactly.
Perfect. So thank you very much. It was a great pleasure to have you here. We were very enthusiastic to listen to things from the world that is, let's say, a bit distant to us, but obviously very close to us in many aspects, especially in the sense of history. So yes. Thank you very much for today's lecture, and looking forward to our next meeting that is most probably going to be live here in Ljubljana.
Yes, why not? That would be really nice, really nice. Thank you so much for the invitation, and I'm looking forward to seeing you again, Dusan.
Thank you. Goodbye, and thank you.
My blessing.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.